중등된 공부 장호라양 라장 자로 건거로 주름니 정전이다 남다라서 진예 동건 저저서 저니제 다가라라와 강다드비 저 마르문도 등으로 제서 조조 간라워지 다제양라 주제양다 그들아 제조뇨모녀로 레제 저도 돈자 마르마제 등으로니까 전에 좀 자라자 돈에 다자 잡진 다저 연들리저 제제도 저저저다 전에 잔데 달로마제 자호라양라 안도도 오마라바자나도 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 오마라바 Umarabazanardo marabazanardo 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 marabazan Umarabazanardo marabazanardo 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 marabaz Umarabazanardo Tirdo jijim jero ozere Dalu dam mambarazan Qadan damju jolo doba Lujuru birnawa jeda soro Yaji jembo zodan nime jang Zone molo jembo ngabjad Pakara tamwa zandu shema do Tumba tuji jangla jangza lo Tani namba tamji bola Shito dela kan samzhi
Good afternoon to everyone.
Tani nga tso shizo tani chachite tani ngonzi ka yin tani tomar tani shangshim shokta tsangma ka sim ke gore.
We are beginning now with our teaching for this afternoon, and please everyone make an aspiration of bodhicitta.
Tani tari nga tso chachi karsang tangbo nga tso shizo terang nga tso shizo tsangma ka kapsi tani chachi ka tangbo la nga tso shangshim shokta sim ke gore zindi tsangma la tani chanlong 시송아 때 김선대 강레지나 맞고 개와 강다 강 접나 되니 춘년나 곰잡나 대 마임비 되니 지 샹차나 되니 돈반돈나 남다 나오였나 되니 샹십 샘팅 아주 자원이 진행 그 말에 빼 거침보리 디 김선기 아주 남남이나 양샹 좀 쇼도 샘기 거래 양샹 좀 쇼고 샘기 거래지 디 korma 망보 되니 랍고 김선대 때리
So yesterday at the beginning of our morning session, as well as at the beginning of our afternoon session, and then again today, this morning, and now again this afternoon, I have reminded everyone about the importance of generating an aspiration of bodhicitta. And the reason for this is that regardless of what kind of Dharma activity we are engaging in, whether it be listening to a teaching or doing meditation, doing prostrations or chanting mantras, it's extremely important that we do so with a motivation of bodhicitta, and it's for this reason that I speak about it as much as I do.
가rsang ka chachiri terang kan chachin duso nangla pe jana nga chu mun duso nangni mo ni mo sim ot nis ka tini gella shanship ka sim ke sona tani nga chu chuchu shaya da tani chosu tini ndela tani chuchin dinji zanzik shepa da tani nga chu ina ta rangbo zini tini ndela yone chuchu shepa te so changma dondang dan ba tani halepa tani yakpore song rezi karti myo ni myosum tani zika jilla shangship sim ke sona tani haliba tani tondang damba rezi.
So the importance of bodhicitta, we could say it's like this: out of all of the people who have come to listen to this teaching, if yesterday and today only 2 or 3 people managed to generate bodhicitta in their mind stream, then this entire teaching that has involved many people coming from far away and me coming from far away too, just even 2 or 3 people generating bodhicitta would make this entire teaching extremely meaningful and worthwhile. And if a few more people were able to generate bodhicitta in their minds than this, then this would be extremely wonderful.
Yeah, indeed. Tenguni changni tindi reze nga zo shanchib ko semze ate tindi rentang hali ba chimbo re nga zo pena nga rong la yin na tindi pena Amerika lan drona pena boni Amerika lan drona tindi mo nga ga jilla kyorong shanchib ko sem kien ro sare tindi kyon ro yin be zena de nga ro yin zi shak reze.
Ti gyangya sonu choka.
Be jagna zente be jagna tindi pena Amerika la tindi drona tindi mo nga ga jilla kyon drona mo nga ga jilla shanchib ko sem kien sare teni ro yembe zena teni poni Amerika lan ro atawala teni yungu reze nga yungu yin zeni ro reze teni zina.
And really, bodhicitta is something that's so precious. It is of a great value. For instance, if someone was to say to me that in traveling to America, in traveling from Tibet to America, that it would be possible for even 4 or 5 people to generate bodhicitta, and if I was asked whether I would be willing to travel in order to achieve this, I would of course say yes.
Di jimsang ka rezina pena shanshib ku sim jilla kesona Moschika jilla shanshib ko sem kienken tindi zire sona tini mati ti mmangbola tini korang ka pamba drimro gore tini murnga jilla shanshib ko sem kesona tini murnga budi tini murnga bya ma tongcha nga tindi kale mmangbola ni konso pan tongro gore.
And the reason for this is that even one person with the motivation of bodhicitta is able then to benefit a great many people. So 5 people generating bodhicitta with bodhicitta would be able to help and be of benefit to an even greater number of people, perhaps 500, then 5,000.
Tinti yendi tini nga su shanchib ko semde pe halipa rentang chimbo tinti yembate hako gore.
So it is important that we do understand that bodhicitta really is of great value.
Teni ti gomthapte nga so tanang te teni shasung ina teni jipchaz teni shajire masong da teni ina tandeni teni kambo lu tun dai khong yore teni te na kyorang so teni mangchi ju de khorang ga lomare teni teni khong teni ti korla teni tarnga yang chutamang bo song de teni maung bala song ge teni kale lojong shina ya pe halipa yang pore nga so muntni te lojong shiwa tang gom jap go re.
So this morning we introduced a meditation practice for the generation of bodhicitta, but we didn't get to go into it in great detail. However, most of you here are students of Khenpo Lodro Daye, and he has given teachings on this in the past, and no doubt will also continue to do in the future. So it's very important that everybody continues with their study and practice of bodhicitta.
Tini yendi te nga so mula pantogona tini mula pantoya ga tini chaking ngoma ta kangrezina shanchibji semre.
So if we are going to really be of benefit to others, then the basic condition or the basic criteria we need to fulfill is that of having bodhicitta.
Tini nga so project na tanga nala sang dorji thaba nala lama la tini pena nga so lama zuche gona tini korang la chakin kan sango gore zeni mambo sung yore ti nala chakin mena machokpa o chakin tini sai tsawa tela kan jogore zena tini shanchib ko sim jogore ti shanchib ko sim yakbo yongken tini zina tini nga so lama susurang lama la tin jana tini pamba ma ba no ba tsawa ne yomare.
In the Vajrayana teachings, there is much instruction or advice on the criteria that need to be possessed by a particular teacher in order for them to be a qualified Lama for us. And in terms of finding one's own spiritual guide, it is said that the most basic and the most indispensable quality that a teacher possess be that of bodhicitta. If our teacher does have bodhicitta, then it is possible for us to rely on them in our spiritual practice, and in so doing we will only gain benefit, we will gain no harm whatsoever.
Tani shanshib ko sem me patin na yang tini lama yin na yang korang so me janla tini janla pamba yo ya lekate shita mashi hako mares.
However, without bodhicitta, then regardless of whether it is a spiritual teacher or someone else, it's very difficult to say whether or not their action and activity is of benefit to others.
Tini namba tso shangship ko sim ko kor ko tini nga tso te pe na shunjing ra boda tini shangship sim ko gumrum ko kor la pe pecha mambo yo re te so ta yinji ko tola yang mambo giri yo giri kandiz yo na nga ha ko me tini tisu korwa te tsama mambo ta go re mambo lok go re te mambo lo na yang pe pantok yak bo yung re.
And so far as bodhicitta is concerned and its cultivation, there are a great many texts that we can read that are of benefit to us. In particular, the way of a bodhisattva and the meditation stages of bodhicitta cultivation. There are many titles translated into English. I'm not sure exactly how many, but we really should study these texts and read these texts, and they will be of great benefit to us.
Tini shangship ko sim te soso ko sim ko na la ke sona tani nga cho ta zo o msi ren tang dang dam ba ze te kang ji zi la ze yo tani nga cho ha ta zo ha ko yong re.
Once we are able to generate the mind of bodhicitta, then at this point we will finally realize what the ultimate point in human existence is.
Tani ola ta nga cho de jembab jibchir ka na ni tani tsikang jipa ka tani ton te tsangmala ngoto shek yun.
So from here on in, I would like to teach on the fourth line of parting from the four attachments.
Tani jipa ka ton te kang rezina tani nzambab shona tawa man tani songyo re ta nga so tawa zina tawa te la mangbo rezi yina tani kang yina tan di kam ni shapi tawa te zi tawam thumbo tani shakayo re yina tongba nyaka tawa te shakayo re tani tongba nyaka tawa te tok gona tani nzamba mepa tani go re.
So the fourth line is, if there is grasping, you do not have the view. So insofar as we understand the word view, there are many different kinds of view, many different levels of view. View here refers to a rather high level, in particular to the view of emptiness. And if we are going to realize emptiness, it is important that we abandon grasping.
Tani tongba nye zia de tang timrir zia tini shikpan ra wala tsegre zi nga so tongba nye tang timrir zia de tani pe na ngubo chika tani ngu ni ta wala tseg tongchi chika ngu ni ta wala tsegre.
Emptiness and dependent origination, these two words ultimately are referring to the same thing. They are attributes of the same thing.
Teni temrir tang teni tongni teni tong chikpare teni temrir yimbi jimsenji teni tongni yimba tang tongba ni yimbi jimsenji teni temrir rezini teni pansang chikachila reshit gyaptaba teni zala kwa lengo red.
So we can say that emptiness and dependent origination are the same. At the same time, we can say that because phenomena are characterized by dependent origination, therefore they are empty. We can also say that because phenomena are empty, therefore they are constituted by interdependent origination. So we can use each of these terms to explain the other.
Teni temrir ziyade kandi zala zewe orzina ke pena nga tso metok teni metok ziki gona pena metok dala yon kanga metok marbun teni koyar ki gona teni tangbo koranga sawung go re teni sajang go re sajang tena la sawung go re teni chir go re teni drod go re teni dichuk go re teso tsama yo sona teni girkin teso la teni girkin mambo zi nyamdun zom sona teni tela teni nrewa teni zinjungare
So in terms of dependent origination, we can use the example of a flower to illustrate this. In order to produce a flower, we need to first have the seed, and then we need to have the conditions of proper soil and more fertile soil and water, a warm temperature. We need time in order for the seed to grow. So with these causes and conditions coming together, we can ultimately the result of a flower can be produced. produced. So this is an example of dependent origination.
Then Tindiga tini timjir tini jedang chilla tini ki gobi ngupuz yin sarti tini tsangma ti dong tola tini tongba zena dong tola zimba o tindi tata tini res ni ta nangba tindi songore.
So in Buddhism we say that phenomenon that are created by the coming together of different causes and conditions in a relationship of dependent origination are therefore empty or not true. So I would like to talk a little bit more now about these two terms, emptiness and dependent origination.
So
everybody please look at this. This is the cause of a result.
Yeah,
and this is the result of the cause. So relying on this cause, or as a result of this cause, this result is produced. And if this result is going to arise, then it depends on this cause. So this flower and the seed have a relationship to each other. It's a relationship of cause and effect. And so this relationship of cause and effect that exists between the two is a natural process or a natural law within the natural environment. In many religious traditions, that one thing produces another is said to be the work of a creator God. And this is said in Western religion. It was also said in religious traditions that were contemporary with Buddhism in ancient India, and also in religious traditions that preceded this.
Teni lo tongcha nita ngabjayin zenken yore, lo tongcha simyin zenken yore, teni lo tongcha nita teni dumja gibja gubjayin teni zenken yore. Ngaso poken raziyin na teni lo tongcha nita gubjayin zegrez.
So, so as to when the Shakyamuni Buddha arose in India or lived in India, there are different sayings as to how long ago this was. Some people say 2,500 years, others say 3,000, others 2,700, 2,800. As for the Tibetan tradition, we say it was 2,900 years ago. However, regardless of the length of time in question, at this point in history, Christianity did not yet exist. However, there were many other religious traditions aside from Buddhism in ancient India. And probably the majority of these religious traditions explained this relationship or the causes resulting, or effects or results emerging from causes as the work of a creator God.
고랑초 르그니 디나라다 정말 하고 싶어하는데 되니 저요리다 상지 시작자다 바 공거 되니 고랑 찌보 되니 때 켈링요 말해.
Despite the fact that this was the pervasive or the predominant view in the religious milieu at the time, the Shakyamuni Buddha himself objected to this view. He did not accept it, and in so doing was among the only people at the time who did.
되니 고랑 그 워낙 가리르지나 되니 고랑 그 되니라 템질 그거니 되니 중고 요래 손에 되니 손 요래.
What he said that the relationship between these two was one of cause and effect.
Teni temdil ko goni teni kewa insarti teni pena jeवन the korang la keala teni saung gogore sar gogore chi gogore tro gogore teni teso chama njom sona teni ta korang keung gore tele jamba go marezi teni zegres.
So what he said was that if we are going to have an effect or a result of fruit like this, then we need to first have a seed, then of course we need soil, water, warmth, time, etc. And only when all of these factors are present are we going to see a fruit emerge.
Teni tela teni rangshung kam ko chuni zegre te sangi shakja ta ba korang ko shiba mare te korang nguborang ko chuni tindi zegre.
So, in fact, this is a natural law. It is not something that was invented by the Buddha. It's actually how things are.
Teni te sangi shakja ta ba zuba mare korang ko shiba re zegre te korang ko zuba mare korang ko te shiba re ze korang ko hako re zegre.
So the Shakyamuni Buddha was one who came to understand this natural law, or he discovered this natural law, but he was not the inventor of it.
Tinti yansarti tini ngacho tin choa nala tinti jedam jeवन tinti jimjere korang jeona tini jewe yongore te korang tini ngupo chunye je jeti ina ngacho te la tarong shapa jemuz jabna teni junde la tini jewen de tsawni kego yo mareze.
So even though this is indeed how it is in everyday life, the natural law or the law of nature that we speak of is that such a cause gives rise to such an effect. When we look at this in more detail, however, we discover that this is in fact not the case.
Teni tambong aso kare ko gorjena sound korang mertak bayin bahako gogres mertak bares.
So the first thing that we need to understand is that the seed here is impermanent.
Teni jewen da yang teni korang yang te yang mertak bares jedan jewen ni ka yang mertak bayin bahako gogres.
And this result or this effect here is also impermanent in nature. So it's important that we understand that both the cause and the effect are impermanent.
Mertak bazena kare rezegzena tsama gateni ndela ta gorze pena nga tsundini ndi parte ndi sachate teni chini somje nga tzini gag parte teni go janazi 112 gag parte teni goni teni nga so sawon teni sarndeni shini yong gona teni ndela yong kan ka sawon te dan ndela yong kan ka sawon teni chigri samgundu da khakari samgundu.
So let's just say that I place this seed or this nut here on the table, and I divide this length on the table up into 100 smaller increments. Then if I were to move the seed from the beginning into the end of this space, then would the seed at the beginning be the same seed as at the end of this length? What does everybody think?
Tarong te sarushana ndel nditola teni ndini parte lazim teni ngaso remo jabni to ndi remo chi remo ni remo samzini remo jathamba jabjagnas.
Okay, so let's just say that we draw a series of lines along this length, dividing it up into 100 smaller units.
Teni remo jathamba jabni teni ndi sawondan dini Dendi chene teni tandela leb gona ze teni tangbo go thone teni gathamba go thola teni sar yong gona teni tangbo go thola yong kenta da teni gupchuk gathamba go thola yong kan ka saun tini ngaso go samna saun chikpare samne tili sam go yoreze.
So, in moving this seed from the first increment or the first unit to the 100th increment, is it in fact the same seed by the time it reaches the 100th increment? We tend to think that yes, it is.
결혼소 삼로 땅다 니니 용나 니니 용캔 때다 니라 립창캔 그 사분더니 찌르다 타들이지.
What does everybody think? Does everybody think that the seed that starts off at the beginning of this length is the same seed as the one that arrives at the 100th unit?
나초고 먹었다나 찍바래지. 나초고 먹었다나 니디 찍보대 니디 용도요래 찍바래지. 리디 동거토라 따로 나초 지무 삼로타나 교수 삼나 찍리 삼근도 카카리 삼근도.
So, of course, when we look at it with our eye, it appears to be the same seed. However, if we think about this carefully, is it in fact the same seed? What does everybody think about this?
카카리, right? Yeah, very good. 야. Tani ta yak bores. Tani nga so metok yang rew te yang tani di thola jang ni dela yona tani te yang kakarewaze.
So it's also the case then, is it not, that the flower at the first unit is a different flower than the one that reaches the 100th unit?
아야, te yak bore. Tani ta tingyan sarti tani nga so rew jundo yina tani nga so Korang tini pena chisuschila tini karma amare karma chigla tini karcha trikcha thamba yores
Karma
chigla
Gotcha.
karcha trikcha.
Let's say. So within 1 minute there are 60 seconds.
Tini karcha chigla tarung nga so mambo tini gyata tongda chi tini ina yiji yores karcha chigla.
And then it's possible to further divide 1 second into any number of smaller increments of time.
Teni nga so karcha chigta ta nga so mambo shenan go nyogro re nga so msheze karcha chigta kema gyalam phennaze teni karcha chigta kema gyalam phenna o ta tindgre chashi gyathamba go chokoreze karcha chigta.
So if we go into this in too fine a detail, we will get confused in our minds. So let's just say that we can divide 1 second up into 100 smaller units.
Ta tindi indi nga so garize greze na tini de korang karcha chik gema gyalam phenna tini ti tangbo da niba na la korang tin yerwan ro yorets.
So we can say that the seed at the first 100th of a second and then at the second 100th of a second transforms, it changes, it's not the same.
Tani pena nga so tartan de tini nga so di lang jerne pena tini chiso nipa da tini karma nishi thamba te nga so tarta wa shena tarta wa yinzena tini ti ngon chama tini ti jablok chama debaze gore ti ngon chama maombaze gore.
So looking at the time now, which is 2:20 in the afternoon, we can say that everything prior to this is the past and that everything in the future of this time that lies ahead is the future.
Tini deba chama tarta yoreweze.
So does the past still exist in the present?
Yeah. Yeah. Deba so tarta ayos.
Do we still have the past now?
Now, yeah. Tani ta nga so tani tarta ina tani ya chichu nita tani karma nishi chachik tim panchu tim maombazi gogoreze tani maomba so tarta ayos.
So everything after 2:21 is the future. At this point in time, do we yet have the future?
Now, yeah, yakborisi. Te choranso yakbo kodux. Yeah. 가시가 삼는 네바양 따따 요리 마음바양 따따 요리 삼고 요리.
Probably there are some people who think that we still have the past at the present, and we also have the future as well.
딘디나 칼상양 대랑인 거래 산이양 대랑인 거래 대랑 칼상양 대랑 요 산이양 대랑 니 말씀도 대랑 요 거래.
But if that were the case, then we would be still having yesterday today, and we would also have tomorrow today as well.
야. 대인디 땅아서 요 말이지. 따따식부 마토바 따따 연초 참마 메바리 차르지. 니 마음바 참마 다른 요 말이지.
So we can say then that at the moment we don't have the past, it has all passed, and we don't yet have the future, it is still yet to come.
아, 드니 다 사원 대치리지 나가서 타마 그더니 삼로 땅에 드니 타마 가서 죽둠들라 점지 제론 점지도 가르지나 드니 사원도 드니 까르차식 드니 차시 야탄발람 펜니 지금 막 또요 말이더니 그럼 매바 착그레스.
So our final conclusion must be that this seed that we have here only exists in 1/100th of a second, and that after this it no longer exists.
드니 드위양 때 ndeyang 때다 찍바래 과랑 찍바 찍장래 과랑 까르차식 때 게마 갈람 펜나 디찍마 또요 말이 잠바 다스타와 디찍마 또요 말이 잠바 참만 데바다 마음 바래 요 말이지.
And the same is the case for the flower as well. It only exists for an increment 1/100th of a second. Everything before that is the past, and after the second has passed, it is the future.
다 니까 드니 karcha tini gerwa tini nika mustaqba tini gerwa yin tini nika la tini tiso tonton sama to mepa chak saru jini tam saundilin de kigona pe khabuyores.
So, given the fact that both of these are so impermanent, that they change so quickly and they're existent for only such a short period of time, it's extremely difficult for this seed to give rise to this flower.
Tani sosogo dang jab gores nga so saundi tani jeon de dis yarki gona tani korang mepaz ta sart yarki goreta tani ngamani yobaz kegres.
네, 양자성내 정은 고마성 kamera.
사운더 tani jeon de dis kegona 든디스 kegona te korang ngamani yo charwaz yarki goreta ngama mepaz kegores.
디 죽랑이 고마성 디 약에제네 쪽.
다음도 가서 사원급 nyaka ke gonaze ndo ke gona ndo korang ngamani yopaz ke greta mepaz yopaz zogres.
So if the seed is going to give rise to the flower, does it give rise to it while it is still existent or after it has ceased to exist?
Yeah. 因生果 哦呀，然后这个果是的结果那些啊，等你俺妈呢，等你有查话是结果的哒，等你俺妈没把是有把做的是。
디 약에제네 쪽. 니 십자즈지거나 이나데니 양답빠스시고죠.
果的结果是那哒的的，的了啥物事么都的，俺说的你没的不的这个的。没把是有把做过那从无到生到有，等这些过那等你俺说啥问题，等你没并不是不存在的果让它产生，还是存在的果让它产生。
So is the cause that gives rise to the effect a cause that is existent, that gives rise to the cause, the effect in an existent state or in a non-existent state?
He's saying, is the result existent before and then it comes into the place of the or is it newly made? It wasn't existent before and now it becomes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now it comes into the final. It existed at the time of the cause, then it is present at the time of the result. So what was previously present is now the case, or it didn't exist before, and then the result is newly formed, was made anew.
Yeah.
Right.
Te le la pozre. Savonti metok ke gonaze. Teni metok ngama mepas ta yo pa ke greta ngama ni yo pas korang ke greze.
So this is very simple. Is the
flower present in the cause at the time of the seed, and then it becomes the flower, or was it not present, not existent, and then newly forms and becomes the flower?
Mate como dwa.
고소고근도
Kosok mas chorang the part koda teta gore.
The paloma
Matso
de
metok
nitate-
sawong the nani metok ki gonaze. Sawong the nani metok ki gona. Teni metok te mepaz teni korang the sawong te ki greda. Metok te ngamani yopaz teni sawong te ki gre.
just as Paloma said, was the flower present in the original seed, or was it not?
Yobachire me pachiris.
Da kozo deni niga yomareze.
Ya nika mena teni metok the chazreze.
So if neither were the case, then where would this flower have come from?
Nika mena the koni kir the kiva marweze.
It's the result.
Yeah.
Just
Dendroles.
So
Well, also the cast niabla nupa, the sapun la nupa la yoredila tene, rebuti chumsigres.
Jevati tendiziki yomarze ngaso tambon dendi takshi jab gore tamboni timrizing yang mare tambon ngaso shapa jab gore.
So it's we're not allowed to say yet that the seed has the potential to give rise to the flower. We have to logically examine the cause and effect relationship here.
Tamboni shajilun the yang mare tambon ngaso takshi jab gore.
So we can't make draw a conclusion before we have properly investigated the process.
Ni samna oya metok sawonti metokte mepaz tini yopa zogre samganduzi tikaps sawun yore ma to metok yo mare teni tambo sawun yore teni metok ti kaps metok yo mare teni sawun la teni metok yore teni ngeti samgandu joseti samgandu.
I think that originally when we had the seed, we didn't yet have the flower. Does everyone else not think this way?
Yeah. Ngaton zampal ngom tsama te sam go yoreze. Karte ngacho lotok mepi gimsenki ngacho mo go re ma to ba lotok yona ngacho mot go mareze.
Just everybody in that the yanjason choka.
Tachini ke tachi rasa mare ta I jalandik. Mare te hasun lehla pozo mare te. Ngacho lotok mepate jang mona rewa. Ngacho metok do mona ngacho metok mepi gimsenki mo re ma to tamboni yona mo go marwa.
Yes, most people in the world think that the reason we need to sow our fields and sow harvest to begin with is because we don't have them already. If we already had harvest, then there would be no reason to sow the crops.
There is.
Is this not the way it is?
Yeah, jeez. Teni sawon. Oh yeah. Metok ngacho la metok mepi gimsenki teni ngacho sawon sajibla lene teni mo gori teni kale teni metok de teni kiyongore marweze.
And is it not because we don't have a flower to begin with that we plant the seed in the earth and then it eventually grows into a flower?
Oh yeah. Teni ta sawon yopi kapsu ngacho metok ayoze.
So when we first have the seed, at this point, do we have the flower?
No, yeah, there's this. Oh yeah. Teni ta sawon yopi kapsu teni metok mena teni sawon ti korang metok mepate yopa zu go rewaze.
So if we don't have a flower at the point when we first have the seed, then we have to say that the dati jukla yanja sone chok.
Teni sawon te metok te mena sawon te teni mepate yopa zu go rewaze.
So
Are we making something that didn't exist?
다들 녀자들인데 공다 다들 네 잠바즈 탑스르 잠바즈 신이 시작했어.
well, Campbell said that he's making a lot of trouble with this argument and he's going to find a simple way to explain it. But
야, 쉬세요. 다 진짜 잡잡지다 야.
what Paloma just said before, Campbell was saying that are we, with the seed and the flower relationship, making something exist that didn't originally exist?
드니 다양한 양식을 출타서 시기는 드니 가서 샷 어도모도 따기는데.
So we need to do another experiment to see, do another try and see whether or not we can get a good understanding this time.
드니 메톡 메파티 레아테 친이게 잡잡진요나 데 마고지요 말 잡잡진요다. 메톡 메파티 드니 가서 사원 그 드니 사원 그 값을 당가서 메톡데 요 말에지 찾아봐. 메나 드니 가서 메파티 요바 조고 그래와지 사원도 더 라틴니 드니 코랑 메파티 요바 조고 그래와지.
So if we didn't have flowers yet at the time when we first have the seed, then is it not the case that we are making something that didn't originally exist?
야, 드니 메파조고나 드니 사원 코랑 요피 값을 드니 메톡데 요 말와지.
So if we have to make something that didn't originally exist, then is it not the case that to begin with the seed did not contain the flower?
드니 사원 코랑 요피 값을 드니 메톡도 드니 잠볼랑 그 사샤가 가와나 요 말와지. 그 진입 숑와리 디 값을 코랑 짜와네 요 말에지.
So at the time of the seed, there is no flower. Wherever we go in the world, we never find.
디 값을 코랑 잠볼랑나 요 말이지. 더 짜와네 요 말이지 디 값을. 사원도 요피 값을.
So wherever we might look in the world, we would never find a case where the flowers already exist at the same time as the seed.
야, 딘디나타 나초 삼나 나초 삼로 할리파 탑 디포즈 땅거 요리지. 다 사원데요. 메톡데 메. 드니 사원 메파데 요파 조작 삼네 드니 삼거 요레스.
So the way that we think is in fact very simple. We think that to begin with there is no flower, and we've got a seed. So a flower is producing the flower from its seed.
지티티 삼로 지무 땅나 메파데 요파자와니 조탑고 말이지.
However, if we actually think about this more carefully, something which doesn't originally contain the other or doesn't exist is newly made to exist.
드니 메파테라 콜라 샤와자와니 시탑고 말이지. 가서 요파즈 그토라 페나가라 락반디나 요난디 톨라티니 리모트나 초코레 마토 락바자와니 메나가 리모트사 요 말이지.
So something which doesn't exist, or something which doesn't exist is the 양자 속내 적한불라. 말이 체크 털링이야 보고문도.
야, 리리리 다강메. 야, 나서 메파트 티니 요파 조그레 삼네 나서 티니 삼거레타. 이나 메파티라 나서 티니 샤와자와니 시탑고 말이지. 메파티라 페리잖아. 나랑 그 락바티 요나 녜티 톨라 리모트나 초콘두지. 이나 나 락바든다나 메나게 리모트 탑고 만두와지. 티니 테단다 보레.
Something that doesn't exist can't function. So how could you make a non-existent existent? For example, if your hand is there, we say it exists so that you could draw a picture on it. But if you take away the hand, there's no place that you could draw a picture on it. So a non-existent doesn't function.
Right. Did everybody hear that? Okay. Do you want to say it a little bit louder? Goda ya puchosons. Dai mkashi go masong, dai yangja ji song gos.
야, 당내 양치를 시작해.
말이 벌러면 양자 ji song go.
So something that is non-existent doesn't have a function. We can't make a non-existent exist. For example, with the basis of thinking of our hand as being present, which provisionally we'll say is existing there, then we can use it to draw a picture on it. It has a function. But if there's no hand, then there's nothing to draw a picture on. There's no function. So a non-existent thing essentially cannot function.
Did everybody understand that?
야. 야, 드니 다 고소나 가솔라 가울리 배치보 요레지.
So we've really struggled to understand this.
디카레제나 데니 당아초 데니 당아초 메토드 메난디 사운디 데니 코랑가 데니 메파티라 코랑가 찌용시 탑고 말이지.
So if this doesn't exist, if then
So if a non-existent can't function, for example, if a flower does not exist in the seed, there's no function. So how could there be an action of it, like becoming?
I'm sorry.
Because there's nothing there. So how can we talk about the process of becoming? Nope, we're not there yet.
나초 사운텔라 니파요레 니파타가 메토테 요파셰그레 삼니 딘디 삼딘디 나초 삼고요레제 나초 양바초가 양테 삼고요레 참마가 테 삼고요레 리티 있나 사운그 니파티 사운기 니파티 디니 제부터 코랑 싸우니 메파제레지 티카스 잠발랑라 따론 코요 마레지 디니 코랑 메나 디니 니파티 요마요 마레지 샤와 코랑 시사치 갸요 마레.
So everybody thinks, of course, that the seed has the potential to bear a flower or give rise to a flower. Everyone everywhere thinks this way. However, if at the point in time that we have a seed, there is no flower in it, then how can it possibly produce a flower?
With
the extra conditions of other causal.
Deni sabang tola deni gen shembo deni nuna deni sajang chu chozina deni flower of the metal gigre.
Je. Ngazogun choaga na tindizena chokre te norwazawana yo mari tadagrezi te.
In terms of our practical everyday life, of course, this is the case, and there's no mistake here. I think this too, and everyone else in the world also thinks like this. Of course, educated people think like this, farmers think like this, and on the account of this thinking, they plow and sow their fields successfully. However, there is a natural process or a natural law at operation here that none of us really understand. So everybody think about this. Is it possible at the same instant for the seed and the flower to exist together? Oh, this is very good. Everyone understands well.
But then if they're not simultaneous, now we have a lot of problems. If the causes and conditions are not simultaneous, now we have some logical problems that we have to figure out.
So when the seed exists, we don't yet have the flower, do we? And when we have the flower, we no longer have the seed, do we? So then what is the connection or the relationship between these two? So what is the relationship between the two? When we have one, we don't have the other. So what's the relationship, say, between a person who dies and then a newly born child in the next life? Tutsu Jawazre.
디소 메데셈 나낭 기피 나낭 시사리 못대당 달로 사르트 기피 부드니까라 코니람제라 아요스 마티니라
Is there a connection between the person who died last year and then a newly born child born this year?
제아요 요츠파레
Koso gyutjik parezignu.
그저 짓
Sim gyut.
셈짓
Tatanam shijik patem Jawazre.
때말에 코니 파마다 된디 마임비 셔탄가 나낭 시사리 못대 따따요 말와지 되니 따따 기피 보고대 코 따따살 기기 말와지 데 직도 요파레 직도 메파레 되니 팔람제와요 말레지
So there's no family connection between the two. There is one person who died last year and then a new child that is born this year. Is there not no connection between these two? Kotso dini kabala drewa yosis.
말에 개방합시 세금에서
So this is not a case of past and future lives.
야 나오래 야 제 내가 빼장되지 내가 빼리지 빼나
So this is an example, an illustration.
되니 메토 코랑 요위 값스 제브 코랑 요위 값스 되니 제브때 메바코니 시차로 그래지 너 끼위니 끝나더니 너 시차로 너 손보 말에 시차로 그래지 너 손보 인비 값은 더 다른 요 말이지
So when we have the flower, the seed no longer exists, it is died. And when we have the seed, when the seed is alive, we have not yet got the flower.
근데 나고
Does everyone understand this?
야 야, 저새들.
Da sabamena da ni medo gie tukke marezi. Sabamena de medo gie tukke marezi.
보천선 거야.
Gee.
대처럼 것도 된 말이지. 나서 삼메텐디 삼근도.
What you say is true, everybody thinks this.
옛날 사원 요나 나서 길로 통금은 되지.
Even with the seed, it's not possible to grow a flower.
사원대 요나양 기특고 나서 작빈직된디나라 왜고 홍관시제지 작빈직된디나라 사원 라테니 뉴가 계그레지 되니 지모그샤니 왜관시제진디나라 톤디 사원리 뉴가 계그 만두지
So if we're looking at this from a macro perspective, we can say that yes, the flower is generated from the seed. However, if we're looking at this from a micro perspective, then we can't say this is the case. Does everyone understand? Gogamindu. Gogamindu.
Yeah. 그래? 따자. 어야. 제 뜻이 그래. 나서 집모신이 삼로타나 당의 양키르 찍제 연세 되니까 다만촌나 티톨라 작게 탑시 잠바즈 그 돈에 가서 시작해 연세.
So Campbell's going to give it another try, and if it doesn't work this time, he's going to try a completely different way of explaining it.
되니 가서 야미까 그동안도 멍부샤고요. 그다음 좋고요.
Well, Campbell's given many teachings on this in Chinese before, and then the communication has been successful. And he's given teachings in Tibetan on this many times too, and has also been successful. So Campbell is confident that it's possible to communicate effectively on this in English.
야, 다 영어처럼 세게 연세. 다 가리르지나. 나서 당니 교소라 저하고 그만 내 제시트 잡고 연세.
So I'm not going to ask any more questions. I'm just going to explain it.
되니 나서 메독단 되니 코랑니까 뒤츠 찍고 돌아요 소나 되니 코니 그 빨라 제담 제고 제가 멘켄진도 오른 제가 작탑 그 말에 대교랑 저거 곤드 빼야 버레스.
So that if both the seed and the flower exist at the same instant, it's not possible for them to have a cause and effect relationship. If everyone understands this is very good.
Ja. Dani takarti titochik tola mena pena dani nyukundu mare sound dini tatapat in UP dini method tarong maung bare dini ko yo mares.
So if they don't exist at the same moment, then when we have the seed, when the seed is existent, we don't yet have the flower. It's
yeah. Ja. Dani method dani tataba imbi dani sound korang debare chari dani yang yo mares.
And by the time that we have the flower, the seed no longer exists. It's in the past.
Ja. Dani ngacho ndo tataba imbi Tini tarta pasipo tomato tini debat tarta yo mareze maung bate yang tarta yo mare tenga chu kondu sha char songwaze.
And when we have the seed, when it exists in this moment, it only exists in this moment. The past has passed and the future has not yet arrived. This is what we spoke about before.
Oh yeah. Tini ngacho tan di sound di tola korang la niba yoreze niba. Di nipate meto yara kia nipaten di tola yore timi ngasu tendi samgo yores.
So that this seed has within it the potential to give rise to a flower is something that we all think.
Teni di nipati tini ngasu meto mepati yar yopashi gores.
The anjasone.
Andi ngasu nipate meto mepas tini yar yopashi gores. Di kapsa meto tarong yo marwa. Do you want
to have got this one?
So if we accept that, then we would have to say that the potential of the seed is that there is a non-existent entity, which is the flower, and the potential is the possibility to make a non-existent an existent.
Tini metok mepate yopashiguna metok ti kapsa tsawani yo mareze pena namka tawre kana yo marindo tsawani yo mari ti kapsa tsawani yo mareze korang chikyam yo mareze ndo.
Yeah.
Metokti saunde yopi kapsarwa. The metokti ti kapsawan yo mares.
And so at the time of the seed, the flower is not there at all. It's as existent as empty space.
Tatini ngatson di tola yopi me nipati tini mepaz korang yopazo gores.
So now
you go.
Now the potential of the seed, we would have to say, is to make something that's non-existent become existent.
Mepaz yopazo gore.
So that's what we're saying if we think that.
Yena ngacho mepate latini shawatsawa ni shithabyo mareze. Korang mepare mepala kandi shawashi gore.
But the non-existent, how could it serve as to function, to produce or become a function such as that?
Kati korang yopazi yena ngacho tini di korang la yopate la shawa leka lena tini shawa shina tini chokoreze. Onjam mepazi yena tini shawa kandi shithabka mareze.
If it existed, then we could say that it had a function and it could serve to produce or to function in a certain way. But we're saying that it doesn't exist, so how could something completely non-existent serve as a function, or have a process?
That tindi in sarti tini ngato kandi zerezina mepate yopate ni keko rupi jonglu ko tonisha na ngato ta sawun di tini metong de kiate sawani dripthap ko yomareze ngaso rupi jonglu ko tila jeshe sawani gyapthap ko mares.
So therefore, if we examine then and we say, okay, if we're going to say there's such a thing as birth or production, then we're saying that non-existence becomes existent. And in the scriptural logic and investigation, then that isn't possible. And so we cannot say that there is the process of birth. We cannot prove or establish that there is a thing called birth.
The yinang muk yinang mukatana tini sawunde la tini jungu yores.
But if we observe it, then it seems like the flower came from the seed. If you look at it.
Tini mukatana ti sawunde la tini nyukandum jungwa tela tini temjirize gres.
And so if we observe it on an observational or watching it, we can say that it appears as if a flower is produced from a seed is interdependent origination.
Tani ripaga xiana ripaga takshit jemushina sawun la tini nyukun jongsar sawani yo mari tela tongni yores.
But if we use logic and we investigate on a very subtle level, we cannot establish that there was actual birth from the seed. And so we would say that birth did not occur.
A
brief introduction. Oh, and so since there's no origination, it is emptiness. That was the final.
So we're not going to go into complex theory anymore. We're going to explain things in a very happy and pleasant way. So if we are going to explain it in a way that is perhaps more easily understood, we can say that looking around us in the world, we perceive many things with our eyes, with our ears, with our sense of touch, and that all of these things appear to be truly existent. However, in actual fact, when we're in a dream, it's also the case that there are things that we can see, sounds that we can hear, and things that we can touch. So if we are going to explain then where these various phenomena arise from, then putting it very simply, we can say that all of these things are simply appearances or projections of our mind. So it's just as the same as a mirage-like city that we might see on the horizon in the desert. There appears to be buildings, there appear to be all kinds of formations, but in actual fact they don't exist. But the reason that this mirage-like city appears on the horizon is due to an interaction between light and the atmosphere. So, in a similar way, everything that we perceive in the world around us appears to be truly existent. There are things that we can see, there are objects that we can touch. However, if we think about all of this very carefully, we can discover that this is completely unfounded. So we did Yanja Sona Chokampala. So we can discover that our eyes and our ears and our other senses things appear, in fact, to exist, but when we investigate them more carefully, we can find that they don't. So in respect of emptiness, it's important, or it's sufficient if we understand this primarily in relation to two things. The first of these is that all of the phenomena in the external world around us are but appearances. So we
Jamanda Mamboti Nangarezi, Nangare, Nangare, Toncher Nangare, Jamanda Nangare. Riti Tina Tisotamchi Jangungola Maresi. Yosamata Koranganala Yores.
It's the same as if we look at this projector up here. It's able to project all kinds of images onto the wall in front of us. It's able to manifest appearances of mountains and people and buildings, etc. But in actual fact, these things, these people and buildings, etc., don't truly exist on the wall. They're produced in the projector.
Ina ngatsu samlo jibmo matang kapsu tini ngatsu dinala yosam ko yomar ngatsu jangungola yosam ko yore.
However, if we don't think carefully about it, then we are of the view that these images exist on the wall and not in the projector.
Teni ngatsu jangungola tani kapkapsu gag yore, kapkapsu ngu yore, kapkapsu chak yore ngatsu.
So we look at the wall and sometimes we cry at what we see, we laugh at what we see, we feel terror at what we see.
So we
as watchers of shows and watchers of spectacle face a wall, from time to time laugh, time to time cry, and time to time feel scared.
But in
actual fact, there is nothing existent on the wall. So in not thinking about things carefully, then we treat the things that we see on the wall as true or as truly existent, or they produce in us feelings as if they were.
Teni tinala yo ni music tini ngola chakyo yo na te ngomandra wo yombo tini ngatsu ngomandra bola yinna charne tini ngatsu te la chak o tinala tini pena drra tini z tingola shariona tini drla chakun so mo chak o tini shege yo res.
So in clinging to the images that we see projected on the wall as true, this process of clinging engenders particular reactions. For example, we might see someone bleeding and feel a sense of fear, or see a snake projected on the wall and therefore feel a sense of fear.
So in clinging
to our own mind as if it were real, we So in just as in a dream, by clinging to our experience or regarding it or being attached to it as if it were real, it produces in us responses of happiness or suffering, just like in fact it was real.
Malam de nga chu chama ga tini zamba imba te ha ko yo re je te nam ko re zina te nga chu malam ga na ni sat sarwi jini ko re ma to ba malam me ka sa nga chu malam zamba imba ko yo ma re.
Of course, everybody knows that dreams are not truly existent, that they are false. However, the time or the moment that we are aware that dreams are false is only after we have woken up from them.
Tindi yendi tini nga chu malam go te koranga pena nga chu malam ka kabla tini moshwanda ota tini dugbo yongya ta na tindi tini nga chu malam ka na la tini malam tindi yongna te nga chu nyingkar kan chowa ga na la yongwa ta jabu shi ni nga chu la sem ga na la dungmar ta 대전 잡으시니 용거래지.
So, but when we are in our dream state, then if someone dies or if we're experiencing suffering, then these experiences are exactly the same as if they were happening in our real life.
야, 드니 멀음드 점바리 와지 정말라 저거. 정말라 저거 인생이 멀음드 점바리 와지. 멀음드 점바리 와지 정말라 저거.
Are dreams false?
네 코솔라 저거 인생. 멀음드 점바리 와지.
Is this the case?
Do you think dreams are not real?
Not real.
오야, 리오. 점바리 좋아. 오야. 드니 점바 있나? 드니 가서 멀음 메비니 겁나 드니 점바티 가서라 등물 망보 드니 용건도 와지 멀음 거 값을 때 용거 언도.
However, does this belief that they are real when we are dreaming nevertheless produce a lot of suffering?
오야. 대 점선강레스.
And what's the reason for this?
We think it's real.
야, 되지. 오야.
You can't say it exists, but you can't say that it doesn't exist.
진짜 그런 거.
Cosina teni di ngomare teni zi chogmare ine yung di yang zumare yang zu teni she chogmare.
예. 야. 다 내급성 아주 점말이지 난지 그러지.
Well, for the time being, it's okay provisionally if we say that it's false.
야. 드니 제제 땡아서 상마하고 그랬더니 점마 임바데 가서 하고 그랬다. 옛나양 나주 점마디 점마 임바 마시나티니 가서라 등물이 온 건도 와지.
So everyone, of course, knows that a dream is false. However, when we are not aware that something is false or not truly existent, then the experience is able to cause us suffering.
오야, 내 딸이 교수 상마 같더니 시송아 가서 멀음도 가서 뎀바레 삼송위 김선기 티니 가서라 등물이 온 거래제 건도 와지. 대 ngo마레제 가서 멀음데 임바 코랑 점바레 때 옛나 가랑수 코랑 점바 임바 마시피 김선기
So it's just as everyone has said, the reason that dreams produce or potentially produce suffering is because we treat them as if they were real, and it is in not realizing that they are not real that we suffer. So what is the reason that we experience suffering when we don't know that something is not real? Marikba says.
Marikba.
Dan Zimba.
Zimba? Doesn't consider. Yeah,
clinging. What you said is right. Yes, it's just this clinging, this tight clinging. So it's just as if I was in a dream and I felt extremely thirsty, as if I hadn't had anything to drink all day. And if in this dream I was to come upon a cup of water and yet someone was to steal away this cup of water from me, then I would experience suffering. So the reason for this is as everyone has just said. Firstly, that I don't realize that it is I don't realize that it is not true or truly existent. And then secondly, that I cling to my belief in its true existence. Does everyone think that this is the case?
Tani ta nzimba ga top nga chu dingmer ta so saman nzimba ga top ko yung yo pati ko songa.
So from this, then, do we understand that in fact all of our suffering comes from clinging?
야. Tani korang nga chu nzimba shisa korang zimba inna korang dimba inna chokore dimba manna chokore te nga chu tam rewa chikchi yo mare nga chu go sem ga nalan zin sarti tani nga chu la dingmer ter yung gores.
And in fact, ultimately, as to the object of our clinging, it doesn't matter whether it's truly existent or whether it's not. The very fact of us clinging to it produces suffering.
아야. tani nga chu nangba ga tini nala tawa ga nala tini nzimba to so par meba shi go ze ga yores.
So that's why, according to the Buddhist view, we say that it's necessary to eliminate all clinging.
tani nga chu de jimba jipter ga nala tani nzimba shona tawa menze tani nga chu tawa to nzimba meba tini go ze wi gimsen te teres.
So that's why in the fourth line it says, if there is grasping or clinging, you do not have the view. And it's for this reason that we say it's necessary to do away with our clinging.
tani ta chama ga samlo tanda nga chu mulum la tani nzimba meba ze she go na tapshi yakshu te kan res.
So what does everybody think? What is the best way to eliminate our clinging to the dream state?
Wake up.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes, that's right. Wake up.
Yes.
Is there any other way besides this?
Yeah.
Deni milam kanana deni milam deni mipati deni hakona yan chokres. Yes, also if one realizes when one's dreaming that one's in a dream, this is also a possibility.
Tani milam ka saggo ata milam ka nala milam yimba kogo wi gimsen sheres.
So what is the reason that we need to wake up from a dream or otherwise realize when we're having a dream that we are dreaming?
Stop suffering. Stop suffering.
Recognize
the empty nature of phenomena.
Tini chetamje tini tongpani ke rangshin tini hako bi cheta dendo shego.
이거 야.
To get out of the habit of believing what we perceive.
Tini so takpa tini tonje te temba yin ke tini zimba komshidi meba shebi cheta dire.
야. 제스 야. 다 같이 때리지 가서 삿고위 김선다 되니 멀음 그나라 멀음 땅거요 바테 가서 시고위 김선데 체레지나 되니 가서 멀음 그나라 나와테서 짐바임바 시고위 김선지레지 짐바임바 시고 짐바임바 시소나 되니 가서 짐바데 멘조르지 코랑 짐바임바티 시소나 되니 가서 짐바데 멘조르지.
Yes, everywhere it says everyone has approximately said the reason that we need to wake up from a dream or otherwise to realize when we are dreaming that we're in a dream is so that we can realize that it is not true and therefore do away with our attachment and clinging.
Teni ngaso karti zimba yembate mashina te ngaso teni kyorangan zimba shinyang mare zini ngaso lama ngaso la lamnanda 파마가 ngasola zenanda 쪽보 ngasola zenanda 지지판도요 말이지 ngaso 점바임바 마시나.
If we don't understand that what we are clinging to in fact doesn't truly exist, then regardless of who might urge us to not cling to it, whether it be our own lama or our mother or father or even our friend, it won't do any good.
되니 ngaso 점바임바티 시소나 되니 잠바시가 결혼 그때 딜란 짐바시고 리즈나 ngaso 짐바시가 말이지 ngaso 라랑 그 소소랑 그 짐바임바 시사나 되니까 아빠가제나 아마가제나 서가제나 ngaso 짐바시가 말해 다다 짐바리 삼네 ngaso 되니까 그랬어.
Once we understand, however, that what we are clinging to in fact doesn't truly exist, then even if someone tells us that we should cling to it, again, whether it be our teacher, our parent, or our friend, we would no longer be willing to do so, knowing it to be false.
근데 인디 ngaso 따따은 소와대양 지바르제 ngaso 따따인 소와 현실生活 따따인 소와대양 되니 ngaso 짐바임바 시소나 되니 물음 짐바에 나가서라 등을 마용한다고 Teni nga chun chuan dinani dungmur chikyang yung ko mares.
So just the same, if we realize that our everyday or our so-called real life is in fact not truly existent, then just as by realizing in a dream that we are in a dream, this realization will eliminate all of our suffering.
Teni nga chun chuwa ga nang la teni ji dungmur chimbo yung nan ja dungmur chong chong yung nan ja chama ta nga rang chun zimba te la teni shung go yores.
So in fact, all of the suffering that we experience in life, whether it be suffering of a great nature or just a small kind of suffering, all comes from our clinging.
Teni nga chu tar nga yanchul la ina kangri zre zina mi mang chi shu zga teni susu go sem go tola teni dungur mambo teni yung teni shepi kaps teni dungun da ngarang ga sem ga nani teni yung gundu sambate samga mare zo dungur te shilong ni teni ngarang la chi mandrig pa shilong ni chi mandrig pa teni zga jimsan ni teni shungundu samne ta te samga yore.
Up until this point, most of us have tended to think that whenever we experience suffering, that the reason for it or the cause for it is somehow located in something not right in the external world.
Teni shirtang shur ni teni nga chola pe na chi soso ndopa mandra panda o ta shawa lamru me panda ta so tini chi nga chu sem kana la dungur yong ya te shirur la yang yo re ji zawani yo ma re ji na yo re ji shirur la yang nga chu shirur ko tini chi ngubo chola yang tini jag le re.
This is not to say, of course, that we don't experience suffering that comes from events that happen in the external world, such as when we don't achieve our aims or when we encounter bad luck. Of course, our life depends on the material world.
Teni zuwota teni ta nga chu susu rang teni sem guna nin zamba tambo shi jak pi gemsen ji teni yung gundu zi dungmur changma.
But the primary reason for the cause of all our suffering actually comes from our tight clinging to things in our minds.
Te le la purezi pe jana pe na ngarang la teni ngupon den rizi yona chisut teni langola jawa teni rizi yona teni ngarang de la ha lepa sem kana la nzamba tambu shini te ngarang de la ha lepa gani teni shi pi kaps teni ka tin de porsona te ngarang ka sem kana la dungur mambo yungres.
And this is a very straightforward logic to demonstrate. We could say that any one object, any one thing, if I hold onto it extremely tightly, if I grasp onto it extremely tightly, I like it very much, I really treasure it. If I were to lose this thing, then of course I would suffer greatly.
Teni perna tarta ngarang la teni chisun de la nga sem kana la nzamba chimbo yona yang teni nga chu sem tin gerwa mambo yungres. Tin gerwati country yung ngarang so rang yang ha ko mare te indi teni yana dawa chi yana dawa ni yana lo sheka teni zi jila teni ngarang de lan zamba mepa teni zi yung na yang ha ko mare.
Despite the fact that we might cling to things tightly, however, these minds of ours in fact change all the time. It's possible that within the space of several months that our mind and their attitude to the things that we're clinging to may change significantly.
Teni ngarang ka ngupon de lan zamba mepi nekna pena lo sheka dawasam teni zi jila teni de persona teni ngarang la dungur chichi ya mare ze oh te porson zo data porna ma porchi me samni teni samgres.
And if I were to, say, lose this treasured watch 2 or 3 months into the future when I no longer felt particularly attached to it, then I wouldn't feel a very strong sense of suffering. I would just think, oh, well, there you go, I lost my watch.
Ta teni indi nga chogo teni dungur teni mepa shetap te teni kanti rezi na nga chu chuluk nangchug na la dungur mepa shetser te dang nga chu jistim ba teni dungur mepa shepi tapshi ti tapshi teni chonzo tndaga manduzi.
So how we go about eliminating our suffering or addressing this clinging, the Buddhist approach and the worldly approach are in fact dissimilar.
Teni nga chun jiktem pa ga teni kandi chegare zena pe na ngarang la teni sem go tolan dopa ma khangwa o teni zi yona teni sholok la sone ngarang la teni pe jana ngarang khamba chimbo zi teni yo go sam teni ngarang la khamba chimbo te mepi gimsen gi nga ga ti dumur yona teni nga cho jiktem pa ga kandi chegare zena teni nga sone leka mambo le gormo mambo sa teni khamba chimbo te teni nyo te nyone teni ngarang ka sem ka teni dungur te meba tendi ka tapshi zu she gare zenga chun jikten ka ba.
So the worldly approach to eliminating suffering would be in respect of a particular desire that we are not yet able to fulfill. Would be, well, if we use the example of, let's say, the big house that we want to buy, that we don't currently have and feel that because we don't have it, we are suffering for this reason. In this situation, what we would do is, or a worldly person would go out, they would work hard, make a lot of money, and eventually buy this house. This is the approach that they would take to eliminate the suffering of not having it.
Teni nga cho nang chu da yin na teni ti kap se teni nga cho so rang sim te la gir chu gyam ni teni ta dumur ma yong wa te she kres.
However, the Buddhist approach to this same situation would be to make changes at the level of our minds in order to eliminate the suffering.
Teni tapshi tini ki nani teni gang ga kres na pe na nga cho jitim ba ga teni tapshi tendra bo shi na teni nerkapse pe na nga cho khamba chimbo zu nyo ki rak sona ngarang la sim gna la o ta nga khamba chimbo rak son sam ni sim gna la kebun ra yong ge te ina yang lo chi lo ni ge jini yang ngarang ge sim gna la ta nga teli kyang khamba zik teli kyang yak bo zu go sam ni teni tendi sam yong ge ti kapse yang nga teli kyang chimbo zu marak na teni nge sim gna la yang dingmur yong ge.
So which of these two approaches is in fact the more preferable? Well, if we first consider the worldly approach, let's just say that we work hard and we are able to buy a house to satisfy our desires, then this might bring us a sense of satisfaction, a sense of happiness for the time being, but with the passing of a year or 2 years, then we might start to think, well, I want an even bigger house than this. And if we're not able to afford it, then our suffering would reappear.
Teni nga cho kanti tini khamba yakboz yo na yang teni yang nga cho khamba tele kyang yakboz mi jambala yo patam thongwi kaps teni ngarang te yakbom ta nga tele kyang yakboz yo go ndu samne teni doba te kyong gre.
Or, for example, if we found ourselves in a situation where others had even nicer houses than ourselves, then the desire would arise in us to buy an even better house, to be even better than others, and then suffering would result.
Tenti inti nga chun zambalang na teni chi khamba yakbo mambu mukr ki yore se teni mukr ki yore menna nga chun nyamchanda teni njemda ta tso na la mambo tongu yore teni nga chun tso la tandik ti teni nga la tenti go ndu nga la tele yagz go ndu samne teni nga chun dopa ti chawani khamba mepa teni kone kondam pherne teni yen rambom phernro res.
And in fact, in the world, there are many beautiful houses that we can see with our eyes, and we see advertisements for them on television, on billboards, etc. And in seeing these images, the desire to acquire these houses is sown in us. It grows all the time, ultimately to an insatiable level.
Teni nga chon nangchu tapshi ti karezina teni shilogla teni ti tapshi ti nga chon teni shilogla teni ti tapshi duya tapshi ti shilogni teni gormo charya tang khambanyo teni mayimbar teni nangni sosorang ka sim go tola teni girju yakbo ze gyamne teni simte yakbo ze teni yang tak baz ka lamlan roya teni teni shekareze nangchu ina.
So the Buddhist approach in this situation is, rather than turn to the external world and accumulate lots of money in order to buy a house to satisfy our desires, the Buddhist approach would be to turn to our minds and make changes or reform our attitudes and orient ourselves on the correct path.
Teni nga cho sem ko toni yakpo teni shine teni tapshi charsondi Tuni maung bala nga cho khamba chimbo gandhi zirgnanda kamba zupo kanti mambo zurgnanda kang yana tela ndopa kene teni sem kanala dungur mambo teni unji yamarez sem tone yapo shi charti.
And once we're able to properly work on our minds, then in the future, regardless of how big a house or beautiful house we might see, seeing this house would not necessarily will no longer produce a strong sense of desire and the suffering that goes with it.
Pena nga so papa ga thola teni jangwa wenzra papa ga thola nga so teni jangwa ga teni mungda teni nga so chiggo yores zapchig yung gati kapsa nga so chiggo gores.
So it's just like if a mosquito lands on our hand and bites us, then we feel itchy and we need to scratch it.
Teni 카시스티 값스티니 측나 테니 다 잡측 마용 와시니 테니 테츠 초라 되온다 용 거래 테니 테 측니 테니 텐주셔 제티 가티 양 테니 잡측 테니 용나 테니 가서 빠바 돌아 마레니 테니 양 타르 드머르도 그레스.
So some people even begin to start scratching when they've just got a slight little tickle. And if this is the case, then when it really starts to itch, if we scratch it even more, then it will turn into a sore and then we'll really suffer. So what this is the a worldly approach. The Buddhist approach would be one that works on the hand at the before the itch has manifested. And we don't need to scratch our skin until it has started to become itchy. So the difference between the worldly approach and the Buddhist approach is that from a worldly point of view, happiness is scratching the itch or being able to scratch the itch, whereas the Buddhist approach is the happiness of the state of skin before it is even itchy.
Ndela tini sem kanala ngin zamba chimbu shongsarti tini ngi tola tini dangwo so shiktam ne tini ta zaptik chongchong so shongsar songzindi tola
de ha koma song chitsu dang
pe jana ngarang ndela tini sem kanala zamba shongsarti ndala zamba shongsarti tini perna zaptik dangwo so gyamni zaptik ngo zaptik shongsarwan raporeze zamba shongsarti.
So once my mind arises a feeling of attachment for something, then this is the same as if an itch or an itchy bite has already appeared on our skin.
Teni zaptik chimbo so teni yang tuna yang tarong zaptik yongore yang tuna zaptik yongore teni mambo tugore mambo tuni teni paba teni dorne teni tarma rendo anda pore teni ngaso zamba chik shona teni tartan dalan zambare teni yang tele yabozu go samne tenyo ore yang yabo go samne tenyo ni teni thamme patin rendo ores.
So just as when we scratch an itchy bite, it continues to become even more itchy, and the itchier it gets, the more we need to scratch it. This is the same as having a tight attachment to a particular thing. Our desire continues to grow. We always want something that is bigger or something that is better, and our desire continues to grow in this endless kind of way.
Teni nangbagina teni tambone teni kyorang de pesho tangna chokse pesho tangna ndukreze kyorang ga pesho tangna de tisut la tayari pesho tangna jo ina ande lan zamba haliba chembu mashita teni kyorang zaptik yong mareze teni songores.
So the Buddhist approach would be, in the situation of the watch, to say that it's okay for someone to use the watch to avail themselves of its function as a timepiece, but not to become too attached to it or cling to it too tightly.
Tenin zamba mayawati kandishi gorizi ta nga chun zamba te nga chu lehla boz marezi nga chu la zamba mashi zena nga chu zamba mam zamba tindiz lehla boz chawani mare nga chu semgna la ngupo kang la na pe tambo ndiri jin zin yore te thapshi yo gore ma to thapshi mena lehla bo marezi.
However, not to be attached to something or not to cling to something is not an easy thing at all to do. Although we say, of course, don't be attached, don't cling, etc., in actual fact, our tendency is to cling very tightly to things. So in order to not to cling, in order not to be attached, we need a method to guide and enable us.
Teni nga tsu nangba ga zena kandi sanji ga kandi songo yor zena kyorang kangba chimbo ga nala mandugse ga yo mare kyorang kangba chimbo yo na ti nala ndugse yena te kangba chimbo yena chongchong yena te la nzamba halipa chimbo ma shi songo yores.
So what the Buddha said was, on this point, if you've got a great big house, there's no one's to say that you shouldn't live in it. If you have such a house, by all means do live in it. However, regardless of its size, whether it's big or whether it's small, don't be excessively attached to it.
Teni kyorang zamba tini chimbo mena kyorang ka kangba ti kandi chimbo zina ti kyola dumur chichi tark ter ka mares.
For the reason that if one is not excessively attached to it, then regardless of the size of house one may live in, there will not be a feeling of excessive clinging and the associated suffering.
Teni nzamba tini chimbo zimena, teni nga tso karte charkin yo na rang teni kangba yakbo tini chimbo zikana la dena chokore. Karte charkin tini chimbo mena, teni nga tso kangba tab debonda zikana la dena chokore. Nzamba mena, teni halipa goyangbo tab debores.
So if we don't have a strong sense of attachment, or if we don't cling in a tight way, then if our conditions and situation so permit, if we have a big house, we can live in it. If our conditions don't provide in this way, then we can just live in a simple and basic house. In any case, without a strong sense of attachment, we can live in a very open and flexible and convenient way.
Teni nzamba yo tsarti, teni nga yinta manda nga kangba chimbo go nala dego, nga kangba dzugbo go nala dego samni, teni samyong gorez.
However, as soon as we feel a strong sense of attachment, then we start to think, oh, I need to live in a big house, I need to have a fancy car.
Teni nga tsu sim go nala nzamba ma shizeya tetang, teni kapshidra kushin, o kapshid teni chigba mare teni kakarez.
So, in saying that we shouldn't cling to things or that we shouldn't be excessively attached to them, this is different from advocating an asceticism or an ascetic approach.
Teni nga tsu nangba ga na teni kyorang yindamanda teni kapshid kun sowa teni kirgo te zega yo mareze. Te kapshid kun sowa kirgo zega yo mare. Te kangreze na kyorang ga sowa kangrize kir nanja te la teni ga nzimpa halipa chimbo te mashi te sungo yorez.
So Buddhism doesn't teach that we should pursue an ascetic life of deprivation. What it does teach, however, is that whatever lifestyle we lead, we should do so without excessive clinging.
Teni nzambate mayongwa tela ta tabshi go oreze ngadi ngaso tari gona yang shayo ngaso tabshi yaboz mena teni kyorang nzamba mashi zena ngaso oya tang nzamba shigman teni le laboz mareze.
However, as we just said, in order not to cling to things, we need a method or we need a technique. Just saying don't cling to things is not really enough.
Tani ta tabshi kare go orezena teni chigte kangrezena ngaso nd martak bare ze oreze korang martak bare terang ngala yona sani yo hago mare teni sani yona nga nani yo hago mare korang martak ba korang yerware teni ngarang ka sem kanala tambo shini teni zona Terang al the yogi caps and arang the same canala gabu yungoreta, signing a maybe caps, then arang the same canala, then a halepa dumur mambo yungore. Then the indi korang murtak bareze, the indi thinning also name the korang takban roshin in the terang yogo, sani yang yogo, maung banayanga yogo, something neat indishini semnang zamba tamboshina, then korang mupu chunik the korang murtak bare, terang yona, sani korang mepatindi, korang chunije, then upu chuni te da ngarang ka tini samlu tini ka ngarwa rendo wi kapse tengai sem kana la dungmar mambo yungres.
So the nature of this object is indeed impermanent. That is to say, I'm in possession of it today, but whether or not I will be tomorrow, this is difficult to say. Or even if I still have it tomorrow, whether or not I'm going to have it the day after is not something that I can say clearly either. The nature or the natural attributes of this object are impermanent. It is something that is changing. And for this reason, if I cling to it too tightly, I will be happy when I am in possession of it. However, tomorrow, when I am no longer in possession of it, I will feel immense suffering. So it's on account of regarding this object as something that is permanent, something that I need to have in my possession today, tomorrow, and always, that we experience suffering when our situation is at odds or in conflict with the way that we view the object. So in viewing the object as something that is permanent and as something that should always be with us, when it no longer is, we experience suffering due to this contradiction.
Tani ngatsun dinani ngatso natun halipa chimbochik go rezia. Natun chimbochik de gang rezina ngatso go sem ga nala yong wi dungor tsama de gang ni yong do zina ngatso soso ndopa te ta ngupo chuni te ni mantan ni ngarwa re song jemsinji tene ngatso la dungor sem ga nala dungor yong yores.
So within this example is a very important logic that we need to understand, and that is that all of our suffering stems from a situation when our own desires are at odds with the nature or the natural attributes of things, or the reality of things.
Tene ngatso ta lojung kan de go na ngatso simte ngarang ka ta ngatso tawa de dang ngubu chuni ni kan tumbo tindi yong go re tindi yona tindi dungmer mambo yong mendoze.
So the goal of our Dharma practice then is to bring our minds into harmony with the reality of things. And if we are able to do this, then conflict and contradiction will not arise.
Tenin the murtak barezia te ngupo korang chuni rezi te korang murtak bare terang ala yona saning ala yo hako mari naning ala ha yo hako mari te konjero mambo yung chokore teni te korang ko chuni re ngupo tsama teni ngerwa rezi teni ngacho ko sem ko yang tedi ta korang ngerwa re te re samne te yang pozo ngacho kualin ngacho tanglin yak bo she thamna teni dumur me parin re teni ngacho tanglin shi mathamne teni dong ko tola ngerwa re yena ngarang chogo tininda ngala terang yang ngarang la yogo sanyi yang yogo nangyi yang yogo samni takban ra osina teni nga chogo teni semga nala tin zambati top ko dumur mambo yung re.
So that the natural reality or the character, the attributes of this object is impermanent is something that we need to understand. We need our minds need to understand this. Our minds need to accept this. If our mind is not able to accept this and instead insists upon regarding this object as something that is permanent, that does not change, that always should be in our possession, then when it no longer is, the suffering will arise.
Teni tabshi chigde terize martak bayin bate. Teni tabshi ni bate kangrezena teni ndo zimba rize yoreze zimba.
So the first approach we can take is to understand the impermanent nature of things. The second approach we can take is to understand that they are not truly existent.
Teni zimba yimbate mashini ngarancho undo dimba yin samni tenti samsona teni dimba yin samna teni ngachon tela zimba ke greze teni zimba ke na teni ngachola dumur yong gre te tari ngacho kongla mulum go thokka teni samaga lan jap songa te tang chik bares.
So just as we spoke about before, when we regard something to be truly existent, or something that is not truly existent to be existent, and therefore become attached to it, then suffering arises. And we illustrated this before with the example of a dream.
Teni ngachola zimba kanjiz nyungna teni dumur tenjiz nyungres.
The extent to which we cling to something determines the extent to which we suffer.
Teni zimba kanji mambo yona Tani dungmar tendi mambo yungal. Duk tengupo te korang teni shirtanga ngasun rolik tendis rendus.
So the more we cling to something, the more suffering we experience, and this is how things generally work.
Tani ta ngaso dungmar sani me pasu shegona, tani nzimba sani me pasu shegore.
So if we are going to completely eliminate suffering, then it is necessary to completely eliminate clinging.
Tani nge samna ngaso terang ngaso shapin nzimba me pate ngaso rumba ni shego do sam gondos.
So I think that it is useful today to speak about clinging in terms of two levels.
Tani shikti ngaso chowa nala, te ngaso chowi nala ngaso kangwa yena, tani langkori yena, kang yona sosorang ka pesho tana yon chokore, reti yinna yon te teso tamche pola, tani hale bang zimba chimbo mashi pa tani zila lobna, lobjung shena, tani ngaso tani zishe tabgores.
And in the first sense, I would say that in our everyday lives, the various things around us, whether it be our houses and other objects, that we should be free to use them. However, we need to learn that while using them, at the same time, not to cling to them too tightly.
Tini te ngaso yang gum gore ma gumna yo te thok mare te gumna kang go gore jana ngaso martak pa gum gore je tani zimba yimba tani tongba ni tongni kana ni te tab depo tongni to so gum gore.
So in order to train ourselves to regard things in a way that isn't characterized by excessive clinging, it's necessary for us to habituate ourselves to this approach through meditation. One approach is meditating on impermanence, and the other would be meditating on emptiness.
Tani ngaso nangba ngubo tamche tini martak bare ngubo tamche zimbare ngubo tamche tongbare zini tini mambo zo song de go gimsen de kang rezina te ngaso ngubo te solan zimba chimbo mepi gimsen mepa ga tapshi te song go yores.
So the reason that in Buddhism we always speak about all phenomena being impermanent, all phenomena not being truly existent, phenomena being empty, etc., the reason that we always talk about this is in order to reduce attachment or to eliminate attachment and the suffering that results.
Teni ngaso teni rambate za mamu teni Teri ngaso tari kungla teni tongba ke gedam jeo parla teni shapaz teni gyapa yenata tate kobda yak bozun chona mamchona tarong chakare ngaso yang toni tokbate yenna mana teni ge tapshi yenna mana shapa chi bugu mare tapshi mambu yores.
So this is at a rather basic level. Of course, this afternoon we were addressing emptiness through a logical argument in terms of cause and effect. Of course, this is not to say that the only way to realize emptiness is through a logical process of examination.
Ngaso terang shapa gyawati teni tez kos kodam chosong andra ore kodam mamcho pandra ore ngune tanim choda mamcho na ngeyong ko masong.
So this afternoon, my attempt to convey emptiness through a rational, logical discussion, whether or not this was successful or not, in something that I have not.
Zodi ngarang ka tapshi tin rig ma song se ne lower the tin dishe jagare zodi ngarang ka tapshi te te rig ma song se lower the tin dis nyokra zu shar jag bi gimsen jires.
Probably the reason for this is that the approach I used was a little inadequate. It just suddenly came to me.
I'm sorry.
However, no worries about this. There are many other methods at our disposal for conveying the same meaning. However, it's probably the case that many of you here already understand the logic that we were talking about.
yang ina nga su ta namgin din la nga su pe na yang khashis ta namgin tin ni lhopchat ta te na la yang yo makhum khen ta da tin di yu jiri ta yang te so yang te yang jo lower ta tin di sha jang na yang ma ko an ra tin di yung res.
However, it's also possible that here today among us are some people who don't usually have a lot of time to attend classes and teachings and so forth, and so all of a sudden to land everyone with this example might have been a bit difficult.
Tini shapan da so pe yak bore ze ngarang ka shapan da so la lo jong shi ni lo sim chi tam bare song se.
In actual fact, this logical approach to understanding these issues I regard as very useful, and I have engaged in this kind of study and exegesis for 30 years.
Tini di jila tini nga so pe na nofsho ko tini chanye rig pan ra ta tini nofsho ko tini ju char ko tini ko ngukhum rig pa ko tindi la yang lo jong.
And then after doing this study for about 30 years, I also have had the opportunity to learn a little bit about Western philosophy as well as physics.
Tene nga so oma go sha ba te tsawa ni ndrig mendu tinti je mendu tinti tsawa ni sam go mendu ze nga so oma ga na la sha ba te ngoni jen de hali pa yak borin de sam ni di nga so zo do tin chanyi rig pa ga na la ta chimbu zu mendu ta zo do tin ngukhum rig ba te so yak bo ko na te pe pan to yak bo yong de.
So while I was learning about Western philosophy and learning a bit about physics too, I never once thought during the process of learning about these other things that the Buddhist philosophical approach, in particular the Madhyamaka approach, was in any way inadequate. On the contrary, as I learned about other things, I came to think that the Madhyamaka approach was all the more wonderful.
Tene ngaranga ti semga na la ngupo khashilan zimba shongni dungmur shongna ngaranga thapsi te peshet tanga yo te zimba re ze yo ze rang rang la.
So whenever I find myself clinging a bit too tightly to anything, then I use this same approach myself. I tell myself what you are clinging to is not truly existent, is false. And this benefits me greatly. And this approach will surely have benefit for everybody.
Tambo nga so tene ne tomba ni tene gom sertela tabdepo goni shapa halipa nyoktra tene me mambo menken tene tabdepo goni yore penate shunji kanala tene ganza kadame tene pena nga so ganza rang mar me baton ya tene shapa tene yore pena tin rapote pe tab le lapores tene zikon gotsgna te yakbo insares.
So in terms of contemplation of emptiness, it's not necessary that we begin with really complicated logic or complicated argumentation. In fact, in the way of a bodhisattva, there is an exercise on coming to the conclusion of no self, and this is a good place to start with this.
Halipa yakbo chikte teni jamgum mpham sanga teni songa nala shadgum khorlo mazigri khorlo korang mangre oya teni shadgum khorlo maziki teni pe le labo yozi teni te halipa yakshuyun te nyamnim sina halipa yakbo yore panto yore goa yang teni len zamores.
Paloma, what's the name of the text? The Wheel of... Yeah. Okay. Another really useful text would be Mipam Rinpoche's Wheel of Analytical Meditation. This is an easy or accessible text that is easy to understand and also easy to practice on.
Then le lapo ni ngonzgna teni ko yakbo lenthap kore.
So by starting off at this basic level and proceeding from this basic level, then it's relatively easy to gain a clear understanding.
Teni ngacho gyarki ngala dewi kapsa teni ketam chire la komba pona yakbore teni ketam ni simla teni pona nyamdu pona teni ngacho yang pothap ka mare.
So when we're ascending a staircase, we need to start off with the first step and then ascend each step at a time. It's not so good if we leap immediately to the second or third step. So today's example was perhaps the equivalent of 3 steps above the first one.
Oh yeah, teni inna teni te so nga so ji kyong mare thapsi le labo thapsi yore nyota jang ka thapsi yore shapa jaw mambund shapa jaw surt pasum sopa yore zi ngoma nala.
However, this is no problem. In addition, besides this, there are all kinds of more accessible and straightforward analytical approaches that we can take, particularly in the Madhyamaka teachings.
Teni ripi jonglu ko tone nga so lojong te tsina teni shindo rezi teni pena ketso changmala teni shertang nga so rigni ga mangji yakbo yore teni mangji yakbo yo chati ti tone shaba te jamna lelabo shigrezi ripi jonglu ko tone.
So in terms of this kind of theoretical argumentation, this is something that everyone would be advised to learn a little bit about, and indeed all of you have a good level of a good educational foundation. So upon this, to learn about analytical argumentation is something that's relatively easy.
Inang deni ripi jongluk tini shipati nga sola pantok chimbu yo mare zo nyamnyung shigo yore.
However, an analytical approach or an intellectual approach is not one that ultimately brings us the greatest benefit. What really brings us great benefit is actual practice.
Deni ripi jongluk kowa te ripi jongluk kowa te ti tini nga chunzamba te mepa shegona kabores.
And just an intellectual understanding or an intellectual understanding, it's rather difficult for this to eliminate our clinging.
Teni ripi jongluk teni koate shapa koate nga su nyamnyung ko thola para girgo res.
So it's for this reason that it's necessary for us to transform our intellectual or theoretical challenge, theoretical understanding through practice.
Teni ti nyamnyung ti teni nga so teni nzambate so tamchu mara mepa shegona teni le labo yore.
And through experience, eliminating our attachment is something that we can easily do.
Teni ta nga so nzamba to so mena nzamba mena taware so yore teni nga so nzamba kanla ngupo kanla nzamba shona teni te la shapa javni te tomba ni ta tan la phap go re.
Nga
so nzamba teni nzamba shon nzamba bepa tawari nzamba shona tawa menji teni nga so nzamba kangla shona pena ndela nzamba kina teni nga so ru ndela nzamba kina nyu ka standard ndela ya ndela nzamba shona teni nga so ndela teni khapa javni mepa tango reze.
So, as it is said, if there is clinging, there is no view. So, whenever we find ourselves regarding something with clinging or attachment, then we can use an analytical approach to prove for ourselves that whatever it is in question is not truly existent. And if I find myself being attached to this, then I can similarly use an analytical approach to show that it doesn't exist. So it's possible wherever we find ourselves clinging or whatever we find ourselves clinging to, that if we use this analytical approach, we will be able to prove for ourselves that all of these objects of clinging are in fact empty. However, this is not the best approach available to us.
디 김성 가르지나테 ngupu mangbu yore te ngupu mangbu tindizela shapa jab gona te tsarkiyo mares.
For the reason being that so far as objects are concerned, they are very abundant in number. And if we had to analytically deconstruct them in this way every time, this would be an endless task.
Tani nga chun zimbaki saga yirti mambu haliba mambu yores. Rete zimbaki nkante chig mato yo mares.
And at the same time, whilst there are an endless number of potential objects of our attachment, ultimately there is only one being who is generating attachment to them.
Pejana nga chu chungkirndi nangla. Tani kama jam kante di kama ziona. Tani nga chu khangba chiri gola tani za jamne gola tani zamboshi gona te pe khabores. Tele kama chiktan zong jana tani te gagres.
Dit is the go katolicism.
Go to zabjab zina so.
So it's the same as saying, let's just say there was a thief in this city. If we were to, as a countermeasure, go about trying to put locks on the door of every house, this wouldn't be the best approach to take. The best approach would be simply to catch the one thief.
And
that one thief, that soul thief, is our mind.
Yeah.
And by bringing this mind into line, then everything else will follow properly. And in order for this mind to be made good, this is something that everyone needs to generate great faith for. Everyone needs to place faith in their Lama, place great faith in the Buddha and Guru Rinpoche, and pray sincerely to them.
Kaagshagona mambosha ji yo mare tongba nye zi ji tsigni de ma to jamba ji yo mare kaag mambosha na ma shin na go mare zi tsig mambo yo mare zi ta nga chu soran de ni nyamnyung go ni gum jamna te ko re ma to pa kaag shanna ko kabore te tsig mambo yo mare tongne zi ji tsigni de ma to mambo ji yo mare zi.
So, in fact, talking about emptiness, expending a lot of words to explain it or to convey its meaning, ultimately, at the end of the day, there is only one word, emptiness. And so, for this reason, the best way to go about realizing it is through meditation practice and through placing our faith appropriately.
Kombayo ne kupsutini dena rengo yakbondo waze di rengo la tini songne de zhe tola mus me pa tini zela songne tini namshi yakbo yimbi kapsutini namkala chimba me pa o tini yimbi kapsutini nima jabni ser nima la jabtun jwa nima la jabtun go ko so nima la jabtun ni tini partani ndindi chi tada tini ti namkala tani ndigda ti kyo ha ko ngores.
So the best thing to do is around us here in Salt Lake City are many mountains, and so the best thing to do would be when you have some free time, go up to the mountains to a place where there are no other people on a day when the weather is good, when the sky is clear, and to sit with the sun shining behind you and to look into the clear sky, and then you will understand.
Teni kyoso mariyone kyoso lamala te kimser nga su jijing thomasong namka la zabzabshini tayinda jijing thomasong zekireze.
And doging tarun komasong ko da kempala.
Te kyoso di kapseteni namka la tani mariyone kyoso lamarewa kyoso lamala lama nge namka la zabzabchini tayinda nge jijing thomasong zekireze mariyone tenti zekereze.
And then what you'll say when you come down the mountain and to your Lama, I was sitting, staring at the sky very intently, and I didn't see anything. And then your Lama will slowly communicate with you. So this is the end of the teaching. Thank you very much.
I'm